another session in biology. My name is Ejiro Efere. Today we shall be looking at the topic, the cell, from the theme, organization of life. In this first part of the lesson, we'll be looking at the forms in which cells exist. I encourage you to pay attention because by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define cells. You should also be able to describe the different forms in which cells exist. And you should be able to give examples of organisms in which such cell forms are found. So let's begin with the lesson. The bodies of all living organisms are made up of tiny units called cells. Cells are found in plants, animals, fungi, protists, and bacteria. The cells that are found in plants are called plant cells, and those in animals are called animal cells. As a matter of fact, without cells, living organisms cannot function, just like a classroom cannot function without students. But if you have a class that is filled up with students, and even a teacher, we can say that's a functional class because the class needs students to function. Even if a class has just one student, as it is here, and a teacher, that class can also function. With this, we can say the students are the functional units of the class. So without students, there are no classes. We can also say without cells, there are no living organisms because the cells are the functional units of living organisms. Cells come in various sizes and shapes. They vary in number in different organisms. Some organisms have just one cell in their bodies, while others consist of more than one cell. They have several cells. Organisms that have just one cell in their body are called unicellular organisms. And those with several cells in their bodies are called multicellular organisms. If you take a look at a leaf, this is the structure of a leaf. If you look closely, you see tiny, smaller structures within the leaf. These tiny structures are cells. So the leaf is made up of several cells. Because the leaf is part of a plant and it is made up of several cells, we say a plant is a multicellular organism. The cells of living organisms show the various characteristics of living things, regardless of their numbers. So an organism consists of cells. We are saying these cells are able to reproduce, they can move, they can excrete and carry out the different characteristics of living things. What then is a cell? A cell is the basic structural and functional unit of a living organism. Take note of those 2 points. We say it is the basic structural and functional. Structural and functional units of a living organism. A cell can also be said to be the smallest piece of a living organism that can exist independently. This means that if you put up a living organism, say you bring up a plant, and you decide to divide that plant into smaller bits. If this is a plant, let's say this is the leaf of a plant. And you decide to divide this leaf into smaller bits or pieces. If you divide it, this is a smaller piece, this is small, and this is small. We are saying the smallest piece of this plant that can still show the characteristics of living things is a cell. If you divide a cell further, it cannot carry out the characteristics of life. So it is the smallest piece of a living organism that is capable of independent existence. Cells are able to carry out the basic characteristics of life with the help of certain tools found within them. These tools are called cell organelles. So it is with these cell organelles that a cell is able to perform its functions. Without cells, living organisms cannot live. So without cells, we won't have living organisms. Cells are also living things because they carry out the characteristics of life. Now, the cells found in different organisms exist in various forms. Some cells live freely as individuals, while other cells bind with one another to form either a long chain or just a small round group. As we proceed in this lesson, we are going to discover some of the organisms in which cells exist in these forms. Going by the forms in which cells exist, we have 4 basic forms of cell existence. We have the first group, where cells exist as independent organisms. The second, cells exist in colonies. Then we have cells in filaments and cells in tissues. Let's take a look at these occurrences one after the other. The first is cells as independent organisms, or cells as individuals. Cells live independently in unicellular organisms. Remember, we said unicellular organisms are organisms whose entire bodies are made up of a single cell. So in that case, we say that cell is independent because it is just a single cell and it is alone. So the entire body of a unicellular organism consists of a single cell. This cell is able to live and function as an independent organism. As a single cell, it lives freely on its own. You can see this is a single cell. It's living on its own. This is another single cell, another, and another. These independent cells or unicellular organisms do not need to attach themselves to other cells. They don't need that. They do not also depend on other cells for survival. They are able to live in their environment independently. These unicellular organisms, that's independent cells, can move, they feed, grow, reproduce, pass out waste products from their bodies, and show the various characteristics of living things needed for survival. So you see, it does not matter if an organism consists of just one cell. The important point is that the cell is able to carry out the basic characteristics of life. Examples of organisms that are made up of just a single cell are amoeba, Paramecium, Chlamydomonas, and bacteria. In all of these organisms, their bodies consist of just one cell. We're going to look at these different organisms one after the other. Just look at a few examples of these organisms. The first is amoeba. We're saying an amoeba is an organism that is made up of just a single cell. It is a tiny, shapeless organism that cannot be seen with the naked eyes. You can't see amoeba in your environment. You can't see them with your naked eyes, even though they are there. So amoeba live in water bodies such as ponds, lakes, and rivers. So when you go to the stream, go to the pond, when you see a lake, a stream, or river, just know there are different variety of amoebas in them. Amoeba, as a unicellular organism, is heterotrophic. I'm sure you know what this means by now. An organism that is heterotrophic is an organism which cannot produce or manufacture its food through photosynthesis. So an amoeba feeds on ready-made food substances in its environment. As it does this, it digests the food in the food vacuole. You can see this is the amoeba, and this is the food vacuole where its food is digested. After digestion, unwanted food substances and other waste products are excreted or removed through the contractile vacuole. Amoeba is also able to move from place to place. Even though it's very small, we cannot see them. As a living organism, it's able to move its body. And it does this with the aid of a structure called the pseudopodia. Pseudopodia are also referred to as false feet. If you take a close look at this diagram, we say an amoeba is shapeless. This is one shape. Pseudopodia are simply cytoplasmic projection. They are projection from the bodies of an amoeba. So an amoeba can decide to make a projection from this angle, which will distort its shape. It could also decide to make another projection. So it keeps changing its body shape by making different projections from its body. And it is these projections that are referred to as the false feet or pseudopodia. So in course of making such projection, the amoeba moves from one point to another. An amoeba reproduces like every other living organism through asexual means. And this asexual type of reproduction is called binary fission. As it is in this diagram, this is an amoeba trying to reproduce. This is the first stage. This is the first stage. We have just one amoeba. Binary fission is a form of asexual reproduction whereby an organism or a cell simply divides itself into new organisms. These new organisms are called new daughter cells. So in the case of an amoeba, we have an old amoeba, that's a mature amoeba that is ready for reproduction, trying to reproduce. This is the first stage. At this stage, you see the nucleus trying to divide. And the third stage, the nucleus are successfully divided. Then we have the other structures in the amoeba trying to divide into two new cells. Then at the last stage, it is completely divided. So we have two new organisms. That's about reproduction in amoeba. Let's look at the second example of a unicellular organism, Paramecium. A paramecium is a small organism, just like the amoeba. It lives in water bodies as well. A paramecium has a mouth. This is unlike the amoeba. Remember, the amoeba does not have a mouth, but the paramecium has a mouth. It is called the oral groove. As you can see, this is the oral groove of the Paramecium. It is a structure that looks like a mouth, oral groove. And it is through this oral groove that the Paramecium ingests food. Just like you eat with your mouth, the Paramecium eats through its oral groove. It also has a food vacuole. A food vacuole, like we saw in the case of amoeba, where it digests its food. Paramecium has an anal pore. An anal pore is like an anus for excretion. So it uses the anal pore to eject waste product and unwanted or undigested food particles. The Paramecium is able to remove excess water through the contractile vacuole. See the contractile vacuole with which it removes excess water. So because it lives in water bodies, it's possible that excess water could get into its body. So with the help of the contractile vacuole, it removes excess water. A Paramecium moves from one spot to the other with the aid of cilia. If you take a close look at this diagram, you see the cilia. Cilia are simply tiny hair-like structures that sweeps back and forth to cause movements. So the body of a Paramecium is surrounded by cilia. You see the cilia surrounding this Paramecium. And the beating or the flapping or the sweeping of the cilia causes movement. It causes the Paramecium to move from one spot to another. A Paramecium also reproduces, just like every living organism. And it does this asexually and sexually. It does this by conjugation, that's a form of sexual reproduction, and also by binary fission, as we saw in the case of the amoeba, a form of asexual reproduction. The third example of a unicellular organism is the Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas is a motile autotrophic organism. Remember, an autotrophic organism is an organism that manufactures its own food through photosynthesis. If you also remember, most autotrophic organisms are not mobile. They are not just like plants. They don't move. They cannot move their entire bodies from one spot to the other. But in the case of a Chlamydomonas, it is mobile. That means it can move its entire body from one spot to the other. The Chlamydomonas has a single cup-shaped chloroplast in its body, and this chloroplast is found at the center of its body. This is the chloroplast. We say it is cup-shaped. It has the shape of a cup. The shape of the Paramecium, of the Chlamydomonas itself, it's like a circle, though it is ovoid. Chlamydomonas live in water bodies as well. It produces its food through photosynthesis. Of course, that is why it is autotrophic. Unlike most autotrophic organisms, the Chlamydomonas has a contractile vacuole. And what does it do with this contractile vacuole? It uses the contractile vacuole to remove excess water that may have entered its body. So this is the contractile vacuole of the Chlamydomonas. It also has a flagella. It uses the flagella to move from one spot to the other. What is a flagella? A flagella is simply a thread-like structure. This is a flagellum. A flagellum is the singular for flagella. When you have so many of them, you call them flagella. When you have one, you say flagellum. This is another flagellum. Remember, we say it's a thread-like structure that aids movement. The flagella works like the cilia. It sweeps or beats across the water to cause movement. Chlamydomonas, as an autotrophic organism, a motile autotrophic organism, has an eye spot. Interesting, right? It has an eye spot. What does it do with this eye spot? It detects the presence of light with this eye spot. And with the aid of the eye spot, the Chlamydomonas is able to move away from light, or it moves towards sunlight. I'm sure you know what it needs sunlight for. It needs sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. So this is the eye spot of the Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas also reproduces. It reproduces asexually and sexually. It undergoes binary fission and other forms of reproduction. Okay, having looked at cells as independent organisms, we're going to look at the second forms in which cells exist. So this is cells in colonies. So cells exist in colonies when they bind to one another to form a small group. So when you have several cells coming together, binding to one another to form a small group of organisms, we say that is a colony. The cells in a colony, that's the cells in this small group, perform most activities individually. They carry out different activities as individual cells, and they perform a few other activities as a group. Just as it is in this case, say we have several cells in this colony. This is one cell, another, and several others. We are saying these cells in this colony, this is a colony. So this is an organism whose body is made up of several cells in the form of a colony. So we are saying these several cells are able to carry out certain activities as individual cells, and they carry out some other activities as a group. So cells in a colony feed and reproduce as individuals. They don't need to feed and reproduce as a group, but they move collectively. Because they are in a group, you can't have one cell moving to the south, and another moving to the north, and another to the east. They have to move collectively, so they do that together. Although cells in a colony reproduce individually, they only do this at the early stage while the colony is still developing. But the moment the colony gets to maturity, that is, the moment the colony is big enough, the colony doesn't want to get bigger than a particular size, only few cells are allowed to keep reproducing. And of course, the new cells that are reproduced, or that are produced from these few cells, or that are produced from the few cells in fully developed colonies, break off. They detach themselves from the old colony, and they begin to form a new colony. So we have a case where a big or a mature colony produces few cells that break off to begin or form a new colony. Volvus, this is an organism, and Pandorina, another organism, are examples of organisms that are made up of cells that exist in colonies. Let me make a point here. The fact that we have several cells in this organism does not mean it is unicellular. Because we have several cells in this organism, we can call them multicellular. So this is Eudorina. It's another example of an organism where cells exist in colonies. We also have Gonium, an example where cells exist in colonies. We'll only take one example, the volvus. That's a case where we have cells existing in colonies. A volvus is a motile autotrophic organism. It lives in freshwater bodies such as streams, ponds, and rivers. The colony, a volvus colony, is made up of several cells. And we have a range of about 500 to 50,000 cells. So this is a colony, a volvus colony, and we are saying it can have up to 50,000 cells, or about 500 cells. They come together to form a multicellular colony. So with this, we can regard a volvus as a multicellular organism. The individual cells in a volvus colony look like the Chlamydomonas. Remember? So they have their own cup-shaped chloroplast, they have flagella, they have an eye spot, and every other structure found in a Chlamydomonas. Remember, they are motile autotrophic, so they can move from one spot to the other, and they manufacture their food via photosynthesis. So individual cells in the volvus colony have chloroplasts. Of course, they need that for photosynthesis, so they carry out photosynthesis with the aid of the chloroplast. They also have contractile vacuole for the removal of excess water. This is the contractile vacuole. They also have eye spots that direct their movement away from sunlight or towards sunlight. And with the flagella, they are able to carry out movement. But don't forget, as a colony, they move in a coordinated manner. All the cells in the colony reproduce sexually and asexually as individuals now. And like I mentioned earlier, only a few cells are allowed to keep reproducing after the colony has attained maturity or after the colony has been fully developed. And don't forget, those few reproductive cells, as we can see here, these cells at the middle are the few cells that are allowed to keep reproducing because this colony has attained its full or maximum size. And those new cells that are produced from these reproductive cells break off to form new colonies. Okay, now we're looking at cells in filaments. Cells live in filaments when they bind to one another to form a long thread-like group. Remember, in the case of colony, we say they form a small group. It does not matter their shape or their form. But in the case of a filament, they form a thread-like group. So when you have cells coming together to form long strand, we call that a filament. The cells in a filament bind to each other from end to end. So they bind to each other's end to form a long chain. Cells in a filament live independently. They carry out their activities independently. So it's possible that the cells in a filament can move, reproduce, feed, and carry out every other activity as an individual cell, even though they bind to one another. Even though they bind to one another. Example of an organism that has cells that exist in filaments is the Spirogyra. You see, these are strands of Spirogyra. All the strands are made up of several cells binding together as a filament. The Spirogyra. Spirogyra is a simple multicellular plant. It is a plant because it carries out photosynthesis and it belongs to the plant kingdom. The Spirogyra consists of elongated cells. So we are saying the cells in the Spirogyra are elongated, as we can see here. They are slender and long. So we have long, elongated or tubular cells coming together to form a filament. So they keep binding to each other from end to end. The filament of Spirogyra filament is an unbranched one. This means that it does not have extensions or branches. It just goes straight down. It does not have a branch or any form of extension. So we say it is an unbranched filament. Spirogyra is commonly found or lives in water bodies, it lives in streams, ponds, etc. And because Spirogyra is slimy and slippery, because it is also thread-like, it has long strands, it is usually called water silk or pond silk. It is slippery. If you can remember, if you've ever seen a site where you have greenish, thread-like, slippery substance inside a water body or a stagnant water, that is a Spirogyra. Spirogyra is autotrophic. Of course, it is a plant, so it should be able to manufacture its food through photosynthesis. It reproduces asexually by fragmentation. It also carries out sexual form of reproduction by conjugation. In all of these cases, we have cells in different forms carrying out the basic characteristics of life as cells. At this point, we're going to be looking at the tissues, in the case where cells exist in tissues. So we have grouped these as specialized cells. In the bodies of advanced multicellular organisms, cells exist in groups such as tissues and organs. So in the bodies of plants, animals, some fungi, and any other advanced multicellular organism, we have cells coming together to form tissues. What is a tissue? A tissue is a collection of similar cells. We say these cells are specialized. This means that the cells have been trained or they are specialized to perform a particular function. So we have a group of cells, say 50 cells come together to perform the function of excretion. We have another group of cells come together to perform the function of reproduction, and so on. Something like that. So they come together to perform specific function. So when you have a collection of several cells performing the same function, we say it is a tissue, and those cells have been specialized. An organ is simply a collection of several tissues grouped together to perform a specific function. So in the case of an organ, you have different tissues. You have tissues that are responsible for transportation, tissues responsible for protection, tissues responsible for coverage, tissues responsible for excretion, and so on. So when different tissues come together, they form an organ. But when you have just different cells performing the same function, they form a tissue. Tissues are found in various multicellular organisms, as I mentioned earlier. They are found all over the bodies of plants and animals. Examples of tissues. You can find tissues in plants, all over plants. A quick example is epithelial tissue in animals and xylem tissues in plants. Epithelial tissue is a protective tissue. It covers the surfaces of different parts of animals. While the xylem tissue found in plants is a transport tissue. It helps to transport substances from one part to the other of plants. Examples of organs, we have the leaves in plants. The leaf is an organ because it consists of different tissues. We saw earlier where a leaf is made up of several cells. In this case, we are saying the leaf is an organ because it consists of different types of tissue. The leaf has a transport tissue, it has supportive tissue, it has photosynthetic tissues and all the rest, so we can call that an organ. The heart in animals is also an organ. This is the heart. It's an organ because it consists of different tissues. This is a muscle cell. We call this a muscle cell. It's just a single cell. So when the various muscle cells come together, they form the muscular tissue or muscle tissue. And we are saying the heart consists of several types of tissues. It consists of a muscle tissue, skeletal tissue, and so on. It also consists of tissues that are responsible for the transportation of various substances. So we can call the heart an organ. Another example of an organ is the skin in animals. The skin in animals, this is the skin. And we are saying it consists of different types of tissues. It consists of surface tissue. It consists of different cells coming together to form various tissues. And when the tissues are put together, they give us an organ. The blood of animals, is also an example of a tissue. It is made up of several blood cells. Okay, quickly, let's summarize all we've been learning in today's class. We say cells are the basic structural and functional units of all living organisms. We also say it is the smallest piece of a living organism that can exist independently. All organisms are made up of cells. So an organism could be unicellular, when it consists of just one cell, or multicellular. And this is based on the number of cells present in its body. Cells can exist independently as a unicellular organism. They can bind to one another to form a colony, a filament, or a tissue. Cells in multicellular organisms are specialized as tissues and organs. Remember, specialized cells do not perform functions alone. They work together to carry out a specific function. Okay, to try or to find out how well you've learned from this lesson, I'd like you to take this question. Dash is an example of a cell that exists as an independent organism. The first option there is Spirogyra, the next is Pandorina, then Volvus, and Chlamydomonas. The correct answer here is Chlamydomonas. It is an organism that is made up of a single cell that is existing as an independent organism. All right, we have come to the end of today's class. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you've learned a lot. I want to believe you can define cell at this point and you can describe the various forms in which cells exist, giving few examples. I also hope to see you in our next class. Thank you.